In this program Master of Crafts, we present to you ball-jointed dolls as collectibles, and not only. Ukrainian masters of doll making and Japanese traditions of creating artificial human beings. Clothing, footwear, and even furniture for dolls. This is not just a hobby, but a true art. UATV decided to give its viewers some insight into the kingdom of dolls, in which many connoisseurs give preference to people. Uncanny Valley. This is not a point on the map and not the name of a horror film, rather a curious psychological effect. In recent years, facial recognition systems have been gradually introduced in many technologically advanced countries of the world. During one of the latest experiments in the Chinese city of Zhengzhou, in just one day, patrol officers with smart glasses managed to detain 7 people suspected of committing various crimes. On the one hand, a digital database allows one to search for matches with incredible speed. On the other hand, the algorithms for recognizing faces are still far from perfect, namely from the human brain. That Homo sapiens are very well geared toward distinguishing not only faces but also facial expressions and the slightest changes in emotions. This skill is necessary for both social life and for determining threats, which is very important for the survival of the human race. The reality of human psychology is that people simply do not know what to expect from a strange person wearing a mask. But that is not all. In the 1970s, a Japanese scientist named Masahiro Mori investigated the emotional response of people to the appearance of robots and primarily discovered a predictable effect. Namely, the more a robot is similar to a human being, the kinder it appears to be. This seems to be logical at first glance, though only to an extent. Robots with very realistic faces suddenly turned out to be unpleasant and even quite repulsive because of the small inconsistencies in reality that the thought process of human brain shows. The decline in the sympathy chart was called the Uncanny Valley. Sometimes this effect occurs when viewing some animations or when someone is afraid of mannequins or even ordinary dolls. On the internet, you can find special masterclasses for artists which explain how to avoid repulsive images. Balancing a realistic character with the right emotional reaction is not an easy task. This is precisely why it is advisable to masters from Ukraine to steer clear from this uncanny valley. This is a very subtle moment that differs greatly depending on the individual. Someone is alright, and while other people can be totally frightened by a much more conventional doll or a puppet, but one that has such a lively, precarious and watchful eye. Iryna Ivakhnenko is fond of Japanese ball-jointed dolls. Their faces, clothing, footwear and even furniture, it's all her handiwork. This pastime may seem frivolous at first glance, but there is a huge demand for such creative work all over the world. I would not say that they took away everything, though the fact is that among collectors they are quite popular. And the more time passes by, the more popularity they gain. It is due to the fact that the doll can be made, so to speak, in accordance with the tastes and wishes of the customer. How did such dolls appear in Japan? What do you need to assemble them? And how does one form a personality in a piece of plastic? Finally, how do clothing and accessories for dolls differ from those that people wear besides their size? Watch further in our program. Loneliness occupies a special place in modern Japanese culture. In the early 21st century, even a special corresponding term appeared, hikikomori, or simply hiki. It means a person in acute social withdrawal, usually experiencing strong stress from contacts with the outside world. According to the calculations of the Japanese government, in 2010 there were about 700,000 people in the state, while another 1.5 million were on the verge of becoming a hiki. Psychologists assume that this can be a natural reaction to overpopulation and narrowness of personal space in the country's social life. Thus, many Japanese, not necessarily hikis, prefer imaginary contacts to real ones. About 10 years ago, local toy manufacturers took advantage of this, so to speak, psychological state of mind and depression. They initially marketed these dolls as companions and came up with such an interesting thing that they could be assembled to your liking. They had pretty conventional anime faces, so people usually used them to make manga and anime characters. You come home, you tell the doll how you spent the day, and the doll listens from the heart the words that you are reciting to them. Others tell such stories to their dogs. According to old Japanese beliefs, all objects around are more or less spirited, and dolls are something average, so to speak, somewhere between the inner spirit and the human being. So the desire to get such a companion can be caused not only by social difficulties. Iryna names one more mundane reason.
Их использовали также с удовольствием, как фотомодели.
They were also gladly used as photographers' models. Since they're quite realistic, you can implement some creative art projects, ideas using them. I saw interesting videos with them as well. They were made like slideshows, but it actually looked like a real movie. Eventually, ball-jointed dolls, or BJDs for short, spread to South Korea and China. Iryna regrets that they did not appear in Ukraine earlier in her childhood. The future doll master had to be content with the most common dolls for young girls. Actually, since childhood, I have always wanted to have not baby dolls, but realistic, adult-looking dolls. It so happened that in the BJD hobby, most of the collectors are girls, so a lot of male dolls are produced. Well, accordingly, I found the fact that there is that niche where there are a lot of male dolls appearing. That is, you can play not only with women, but also with men. Approximately 10 years ago, Iryna became first interested in sculptural dolls, that is, those that do not change their pose, but it turned out that there were articulated and realistic analogs in Japan. Since then, the Ukrainian master has studied all the nuances of these BJDs and willingly shares them with the UATV. Typically, designer dolls are handmade from beginning to end, but in the case of BJDs, it is easier and more optimal for Iryna to order ready-made bodies from Korea or Japan, that is, those countries that set the fashion in this specialized sphere. I want to make my own bodies. It's just that the production process is very complicated. It's one thing to get a shipment of heads from Korea and a totally different thing to get a batch of disassembled bodies, 20 pieces. This is a very large cargo, which can cause suspicion at the customs border, and so on. Nevertheless, while it is technically more difficult altogether, I aspire to this. These polyurethane doll bodies reproduce all the main human joints in the form of the ball joints. Inside, 2 rubber bands are stretched from hand to hand, the other one from one foot to the head and then to the second foot. Due to this, the doll does not break up into parts. Movable fingers are held on the same miniature balls with bands inside. Although there is nothing special about the design itself, it's a very delicate piece of work. When I received the first male doll, the first thing we did was completely disassemble it, looking at it, twisting it, and then putting it back together. Before the doll is being assembled, when it is in a disassembled form, all the details are visible right before your eyes. This is called a dissected body. The key to BJDs is, in fact, the head. From the very beginning, Iryna decided to go beyond conventional characters with a cartoon appearance and make realistic faces. This is a true work of sculpture. First, you need to fashion a prototype model using a special wax. It is sold enough to conveniently take a cast of it, and at the same time, when heated, it softens and becomes easier to cut, coat, drill, and design the necessary sizes. In order to prepare a master model for casting, it must be very well sanded and coated. You need more solid material so that the model could safely survive the removal of silicone molds and extraction from there. Iryna fills the silicone molds with double-component epoxy resin. Initially, when mixed, it is soft, but after a few hours, as a result of the chemical reaction, it freezes and becomes very hard. This process is called polymerization. The second model is honed to perfection and sent to the factory, where it is already cast from polyurethane, the same material as the important bodies. Imagine all this for the sake of one doll's head. Work on a doll is a very long and tedious process, both in terms of the amount of labor put into it and the time, because there are many technological breaks when something dries or polymerizes. In short, it takes many months. In the head, there are slits for the glass eyes. They can be moved in different directions after the assembly, changing the direction of the vision. Iryna calls the painting of doll faces tender, that is subtle and unobtrusive. The master uses pastel and acrylic. For example, the stubble of this doll consists of many small dots and lines of at least 3 different shades. You also shouldn't overdo the face-up, otherwise the realistic appearance will lose its effect. After the painting, Iryna covers the polyurethane face with a special Japanese varnish. We ordered this varnish, which we received in several months. Its most characteristic feature is that applied in 3, 4, 5 or more layers, it still remains matte. You cannot take this handsome man by the face in order to not scratch the varnish, only by the back of the head. Polyurethane quickly turns yellow from direct rays of light, so it is better to keep BJDs away from the sun. A separate problem is dressing them up. You can order finished, average things from Japan or Korea, but Iryna does not like compromises. Once she was fond of historical reenactment and sewed herself dresses and outfits of the 17th and 18th centuries. However, for the sake of dolls, the master had to completely retrain herself. There are a number of nuances that are typical only for dolls, because they have solid bodies and in places of joints the clothing can bulge. There you need to use specific widenings, among other things. If we speak about just human clothing, then people have experimentally developed widenings for different types of figures. And they're given an arithmetic value. Add this many centimeters here and here, divide them in half and subtract a quarter of this size. I tried to apply this method for a doll, but it didn't work out. So the master does a lot of things just by eye and then adjusts them to a specific body. There are also more or less universal dresses due to opulence. With shoes, it's even more difficult. Despite the fact that Iryna has a field-specific education, initially she could not make the simplest doll shoes. As it turned out, both factories and individual masters were adamant in not sharing patterns. They are part of the commercial secret in this sphere. I had to invent a lot, because those reinforcements that are used are so thick that they turn doll shoes into something cumbersome and look awful. So you have to invent your own methods. I come up with soles and I make the heels every time individually, depending on the model. The experience of the Ukrainian doll master attracts the most demanding customers. Recently, Iryna was asked to make geta. These are Japanese wooden flip-flops on a very elevated basis. In the doll size, their length was 8 centimeters and the height was the same. The upper part had a thong, like in a real geta. Those were ordered by a Chinese woman, because in China there was not a single master who could make traditional Japanese wooden flip-flops. You know, Japan is much closer and they have more materials on this subject. At home, Iryna Ivakhnenko has not only a sewing and shoe shop, but also a furniture factory. It turned out that it is very difficult to find furniture for dolls more than half a meter in size, so the master developed miniature folding chairs, a sofa made of plywood, and even a majestic throne. Thus, you can take pictures of your darlings in a decent-looking interior. This is how one Ukrainian master makes 3 kinds of heads: Thomas, Chris and Natalie, plus dozens of models of historical and modern clothing, designer shoes and furniture. All this is in great demand beyond the borders of Ukraine. People from the US and Canada buy my items with great pleasure. Europe buys as well, but less, because there are fewer interested customers. However, the geography itself is greater. That is France, Great Britain, Germany, Belgium, Spain and Greece. I had customers in all these countries. And I also have customers from China. Now I have an order for the head of an interesting person. It's almost ready, but it's too early to elaborate because they wanted all the copies for themselves. The customers are 2 girls. As if this is not enough, Iryna also makes a series of animal dolls. Human-like beasts, a mouse, a toad, a raccoon and a fox are made using the same technology as with other dolls. However, they're completely designer ones. The body and everything else is made by Iryna from beginning to end. As she says herself, she does this to relax. My first doll, a small mouse, appeared before the first head of Thomas. For me, it's easier to switch from one thing to another. I've worked on one project and then I start working on another one. This allows me to not get exhausted or bored, both morally and physically. With such a pace of relaxation, Iryna Ivakhnenko will open her own theme park in a couple of years, and there certainly won't be room for an uncanny valley in it, rather only for pleasant human-like companionships.